I'm Brian Jennings, Head of Adult Services at the New City Library, and I'm here with Nancy Moskowitz. We do these webinars, What's New and What We're Reading, every month, usually on the first Friday of the month at 4 o'clock. And then we record them and put them on our YouTube channel at the end of the session today. I will send out a list of the books we discussed, most of the books. There's a few we're going to leave just for you guys who attend live. That's your special reward for joining us at 4 o'clock on a Friday. But Nancy and I were just talking about how we really enjoyed preparing this. And this is one of our favorite webinars to do. These are not necessarily the best books of 2022, but they're our personal favorites. Nancy, myself, and we've also added Mrs. Phillips has recommended a teen book for us. So Nancy, go ahead and start us off.
Okay. Okay. These are covers of some of the books I'm going to talk about. So let's get started. Okay, my favorite mystery of the year, Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. The cover is not showing up, but anyway, there it goes. This was the winner of the 2022 Anthony Award for Best Novel and my personal favorite mystery. Actually, because I run the Investigating Mysteries discussion group, I like to pick books for my mystery group that are kind of outside of my personal favorites. So I like to pick things that are something I wouldn't necessarily read. So this book, I didn't have a lot of expectations for it, although he did write, his first book was Blacktop Wasteland, which I did not read. But this book was a revelation to me. It's about two fathers, one black and one white. They're both ex-cons, and they band together to solve the mystery of who killed their sons. Now, their sons were married to each other, and both of these fathers had a really hard time with this. They couldn't accept it. They were embarrassed by it. They were ashamed. They were repulsed. And they both, now that their sons are dead, feel very guilty about their behavior toward their sons. They wish they had taken a different attitude. So they decide they're going to find out who killed their sons because the police don't seem to be very interested. The reason I like this book is it talks about a lot of themes and a lot of things that are difficult, such as racism, homophobia. It also talks about redemption, forgiveness, guilt, and acceptance. And I felt that this book really touched my heart. And for a mystery to do that, I think is rather unusual. So out of all the books that I'm going to talk about today, if you read this one, I mean, this is what I most want people to read because I love this book. And he's got his first book is coming out in a few weeks, so I'm going to read that one too. So
high recommendation there, Nancy.
It is. It was probably my favorite book of the year.
When does Investigating Mysteries meet for the?
Oh yes, we meet on the 4th Monday of the month. So our next meeting is December 19th, in case anyone's interested in. And the book that we're reading is A Man Named Doll, which was recommended by my friend Brian Jennings. And this book is very good. So another book I didn't think I'd like. Sometimes you can surprise yourself reading out of your comfort zone and you find something that's just a revelation. So if you want to take the book, we have it at the library. And if you want to get Razorblade Tears, put it on your list. You won't be sorry. Okay. My next book is my favorite suspense novel of the year, and that's called Blood Sugar by Sascha Rothchild. This was a first novel, and it's told from the perspective of a serial killer who has killed, she's accused of 4 crimes. 3 of them she did, and the one she's accused of most recently is killing her husband, and she didn't do it. But who's going to believe her because she's a successful serial killer? And this book makes a distinction between a sociopath and a serial killer. She happens to be a serial killer who's very well adjusted, has lots of friends, and is a therapist. She just happens to be a serial killer. So if that sounds like something you might want to read about, it's kind of a fun premise for, a gory book. It's not really gory, but for a book about killers. So I also thought this book was fun, and I'm looking forward to whatever she has next. Okay. My favorite dystopian novel of the year are Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. I'm sure most of you have heard of Celeste Ng. She's a wonderful writer. And in this book, she takes a look at what could be happening in the near future. In the society that she discusses, patriotism is very important, and your children can be taken away from you if you're deemed not patriotic enough. And they decide what's patriotic. So in this book, 12-year-old Byrne, a young boy, is trying to find his mom, who has left the family when he was 9, and he doesn't know where she went. His father won't talk about her. He finds a clue in the library where his dad works, and he decides to find her. So this book is about the journey of finding her and what happens to our society when we decide we can ban books and decide what's patriotic and what isn't. It's a scary book, and I think more scary because it's possible it could happen. It's believable enough that you think it could happen. So I highly recommend this book. Although if you read any of her books, you won't regret it.
My
Okay.
sister just recommended that as well. So
Oh, okay. So you got two people who liked it. I've ordered more copies because there were a lot of people on hold. Okay, my favorite reread of the year is Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont by Elizabeth Taylor. And it's not Elizabeth Taylor, the actress. It's the English author, Elizabeth Taylor, who, as I say here, was considered one of the best English authors of the 20th century. But nobody reads her today. I did buy this book because I noticed that it was reprinted, and because I get to buy the fiction, I could buy what I want, as long as I think it's worthwhile. And I just love this book. I read it in my 40s, and reading it again now, I had really more of an emotional response to it. It's about an old woman. She's a recent widow. She decides, rather than be a burden on her daughter, she'll move to a London hotel, which is very genteel and shabby at the same time. And while she's there, she realizes the worst enemies that the inhabitants of the hotel have are loneliness and boredom. They're kind of sitting around. When they get really bad, they have to be moved out of the hotel because they're not allowed to die there. She does strike up a friendship by accident with a young man, and that turns out to be a very meaningful relationship to both of them. And it makes for a very heartfelt book. And if you don't cry at the end of this book, then you have no heart, because it's just wonderful. It's a quiet book. There's not a lot that happens, but the way she dissects human behavior and people's hearts is just astonishing. I just really enjoyed this book again, and I find it more relatable as I'm older.
is that one of those New York Review of Books editions?
I'm not it might be. Yeah, it was published by Virago Press in London, who they did a lot of women authors who had been kind of forgotten. It's one of those. It's kind of unfortunate that some authors who are so good are just, they go by the wayside, and she's one of them. And I think that she's somebody worth discovering.
It's on display in the window at the library.
It is, and it's short, so you won't have to make a huge time commitment, but it's worth it. Okay. Favorite sequel of the year, Tracy Flick Can't Win by Tom Perrotta. If you read Election or saw the movie, you know that Tracy Flick was the star of the book. She was running for president at the time of her school. And in this book, she's an assistant principal of a high school that she went to. And although it seems odd that Tracy Flick kind of has settled for kind of a humdrum life, she did give up her dreams of law school because her mother was sick. So she comes back to her hometown, becomes a teacher, and then becomes an assistant principal. Her dreams are scaled down quite a bit, but she's very good at her job, and she's kind of all but promised the principal job when her principal retires. but through dirty politics and misogyny, she finds that may be snatched away from her. And that's what I liked about the book, was it takes a small subject but makes it very intriguing. And I think there are probably a lot of women who could identify with Tracy Flick. So I'd recommend this one. Oh, here's favorite historical fiction of the year. This is a tie. The Sweetness of Water by Nathan Harris and Haven by Emma Donoghue. The Sweetness of Water, I think I've talked about before. It's a book, it's a first novel, and it's about two slaves who have recently been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. The war is over, and they want to make some money in order to go to find their mother up north. They get a job as farmhands working for a white farmer who treats them, for the first time in their life, they're treated like human beings. They're paid the same wage a white man would be paid, and they're treated with respect and dignity and consideration. And in the meantime, the town that surrounds this farm is not as enlightened. And if you want to look at the beginnings of racism and Jim Crow, not the beginning of racism, but Jim Crow, where just because a war ended didn't mean the war had ended. And I found this was a very powerful book. I highly recommend this one, especially if you like the Civil War period, and if you like discovering the origins of some of our very strongly held beliefs that are now being dismantled. Haven by Emma Donoghue. I'm sure some of you have heard of her. This book was very unique. It goes back to 7th century Ireland, where 3 monks go out in a tiny little boat to create a new monastery. And the monastery, they're trying to find a place that's kind of isolated and where they can just be independent. They pick this place, well, actually, the leader of the monks picks this most unprepossessing place. It's like a rock in the middle of the ocean. There's a little tiny beach and then a cliff that goes straight up. And they are going to have to live there independently. They're not going to be able to trade with anyone, go for supplies. And they realize that the blind faith in God that the lead monk has is going to be very dangerous to them and to their survival. So I enjoyed this book very much. Next. All right. The favorite humorous nonfiction of the year, Profiles in Ignorance, How America's Politicians Got Dumber and Dumber by Andy Borowitz. Just a disclaimer, it will not be funny if you're a Republican. But if you aren't, what he does, Andy Borowitz writes a humor column for the New Yorker, and he goes back in time to look at politicians who have amused us with their stupidity. And of course, he talks about Dan Quayle and some others. The thing is, he makes a kind of a correlation that it used to be that people were embarrassed by being dumb, then they accepted being dumb, and now we celebrate being dumb. So I don't mean to be biased or anything, but this was a really funny book, and you'll just laugh out loud. Okay, now on the opposite side, the favorite serious nonfiction of the year is Cabin Fever, The Harrowing Journey of a Cruise Ship at the Dawn of a Pandemic by Michael Smith and Jonathan Franklin. And if you ever saw the Poseidon Adventure, you will very much get the same vibe from this book, because you're reading about people who are going just to have a good time and saved up their money. This is something I'm looking forward to, and then all hell breaks loose. This book takes place in early March of 2020. The Holland American Line decides they're going to send their cruise ship, the Zandam, on a 3-week cruise to South America. Well, South America doesn't have any COVID, so they think it's safe. However, the very next day, they decide to pull back all their ships, but this one is already gone. And at first, everything is normal and people are enjoying themselves. They're dancing and eating together and just hobnobbing with each other. But then people started getting sick, both the passengers and the crew. And the only thing that the infirmary has, they have 2 doctors and they have cough syrup and Tylenol and 1 ventilator. So what happens is people have to be quarantined in their cabins. and they find that now they can't stop at any ports. They can't disembark sick passengers. They can't go anywhere. They're just floating around in the water. They are running out of fuel. They're running out of water. They're running out of they're running out of oxygen. And so the story's a real nail biter because you don't know what's going to happen next. They can't go through the Panama Canal. I mean, I thought this book was just riveting, and it was just like reading a thriller, except it's real. So, and in fact, I was just on a cruise, and on my last day, I recommended this book to some people, since we were getting off the boat anyway. And if you've been on a cruise, you're really going to be scared along with the passengers because you know what being on a cruise ship is like.
So you're telling me you read this book, got freaked out, and then you went on a cruise?
I did.
Nice.
I did. And I came back. I had COVID. Okay, my favorite biography of the year is The Adventures of Miss Barbara Pym by Paula Byrne. Now, if you don't know who Barbara Pym is, she was a writer of the 20th century, and she wrote quiet little books. She's actually been most compared to Jane Austen, creating a tiny little world, but she's very funny, like Jane Austen can be, and I love Barbara Pym. But if you haven't read her, don't bother with this book because it won't resonate with you at all, even though she had a semi-interesting life. But because I love Barbara Pym, I love the book. All right, that's very personal, so unless you like her, don't read her. Don't read this. Okay, favorite true crime of the year, Blood and Ink, the scandalous jazz age double murder that hooked America on true crime by Joe Pompeo. And this is a look at the Hall Mills murder of 1922. And in New Brunswick, New Jersey in 1922, a young couple came across two dead bodies. It was early morning, and it was Minister Hall and Mrs. Mills, and this became known as the minister and the choir singer. They were a couple that had been having an affair, and they were found shot to death, and their bodies were posed. Now, as soon as the word got out about these dead bodies, people came and they kind of covered the crime scene, stealing souvenirs and trampling all over everything. So that didn't help things. And what was really interesting about this is people were this was the whole country was fascinated by this sordid tale, and tabloid journalism was actually created because people were insatiable, had such an insatiable curiosity for the details. So we can thank the Hall Mills murder for the rise of tabloid journalism. And I don't think this is a real spoiler, but this crime has never been solved. Yeah. Even after all these years. Anyway, yeah, but it's very interesting. Okay, my favorite ebook of the year, Empty Mansions, The Mysterious Life of Hugette Clark and the Spending of a Great American Fortune by Bill Dedman. I don't read ebooks a lot, but I had no print books at home, and I was just noodling around on Libby trying to find something to read. And which is fun because you don't know, it's like being in a great big library and just browsing, which you can't really do in our library right now. But I found this book. This was one of the strangest women who ever lived, Hugette Clark. She died at the age of 105. Her father, who was born in the 18th, and she died he died in the 21st century. Her father was I forget, his name was Mr. Clark. I can't remember his first name, but he founded a copper fortune in Butte, Montana. And Hugette and was a child of his second marriage. And when he died, he left her all this money. And she lived a very strange life. She bought a lot of real estate, which meant that she owned floors of apartments in a mansion. She had a house in Santa Barbara that she hadn't been to in 1954, but she paid a fortune of money just to keep it open, and owned a house in Connecticut that she never went to. She never saw it. And so when she got to be quite old, she didn't really take care of herself, and she had some kind of ulcers or things on her face, and she was a mess. So she was taken to the hospital, Mount Sinai Hospital, and she loved it so much that she never left. And she spent the last, say, 10, 15 years of her life, maybe even more, living in the hospital. And of course, because she had no direct family, people kind of maybe took advantage of her. And she had an aide that she was fond of. The aide gave her tons of money. The hospital wanted money. So she lived this very sad life. She lived to 105, died in the hospital. And I think we could all realize that being rich doesn't mean you're going to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
So you will not envy her at all. Okay, these are the books I didn't get around to this year, and there's probably way more than this. The first one was Matrix by Lauren Groff, which is a historical that takes place in the Middle Ages. A young woman is sent to a convent to whip it into shape because it's not doing well. And it's based on a real person. And that sounded interesting. I just never got around to it. Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. It's a family drama that sounds like it's got a lot to it.
I read that.
Oh, you did? Did you like it?
I did. It was the first Franzen book I'd ever read.
Oh, yeah. It's got a nice cover. Looks like it takes place in the 70s. And then finally, I love Irish fiction, Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. It takes place during the Troubles, and I'm looking forward to reading that. And there's probably others. And there's other books I was thinking I really liked. Horse by Geraldine Brooks. That one popped into my mind. And I mean, there's so many wonderful books. And before I finish, I just want to mention to people that you can keep your history on your account, because that's what I do. And I forget something I read 6 or 8 months ago, I just go back and see what I checked out. So that's very helpful. And if you don't keep your own list, you could let the library keep one for you. But you have to turn that feature on because of privacy reasons. So if you have any questions about that, we can talk you through it. All right.
Okay, thanks, Nancy.
You're welcome.
And before we get to my picks, I asked Mrs. Phillips, our young adult librarian, for a recommendation, and she's recommending An Arrow to the Moon by Emily X. Pan. And apparently she said at the last meeting of the teen librarians in the library system, everyone loved this book. So if you're looking for a book, I would say 14 and older, this would be a good one. And sometimes adults enjoy teen books as well. And now we're going to talk about some of my favorites. I'm not as well read as Nancy, but I'm going to do my best. Favorite short book of the year, Foster by Claire Keegan. This book does not take a long time to read. You could read it in a night, probably around 100 pages or so, but she packs so much meaning into a short book. And in fact, I enjoyed it so much that I went back and read her previous book, Small Things Like These, which is probably even better than Foster. And then I read the book previous to that, which is a book of short stories. So if you're looking for a good author and something that you can read quickly, her books take place in Ireland. Mostly one of the short stories was in the States. But it's very interesting to me because all of the things that we think about Irish fiction, the kind of folklore and mysticism are built into it, but her stories take place relatively modern, I would say, in my lifetime. So let's say the last 40, 50 years. So they're modern in a sense, but it's kind of like visiting Ireland now. It is modern, but there is this sense of the past and folklore, mysticism all built into it, and she packs all of that into her books in a tremendous way. Also, if you're looking for other short stories, David Means, who's actually a local author, lives in Nyack, has written Two Nurses Smoking. And his stories, because he does live in Nyack, they really do seem like, um, the story, Two Nurses Smoking, the title story. When you're reading it, at least for myself, you have this picture in your mind of what you're reading, and I kind of see the nurses standing outside of Nyack Hospital. And some of the other stories, you're reading it and you're like, hey, you're talking about, this person or that celebrity who lives in Nyack. So it's really kind of interesting. Favorite local history book, Confessions of a Hayseed DA. This is uh, by Robert Meehan, edited by his daughter. Meehan was the district attorney prior to Ken Gribbets. Gribbets worked for him. And of course, Gribbets wrote a book. Um, and Meehan's book, since Meehan was the predecessor to Gribbets, I went back, I had never read the Gribbets book. So you're really looking at a kind of a legal history of Rockland County from, let's say, mid 60s through early 80s if you read the books together. I could be off on those dates, but what it is it's looking at a county that was mostly rural, and then is transitioning into this suburban place with more people, more I equals more crime. And Meehan worked in Manhattan for the district attorney there, I believe. So he kind of utilizes those connections to help kind of modernize the way they do things in Rockland. Very interesting. His family goes back to Haverstraw, and it starts out. Um, I guess he's a Democrat, but the Republicans controlled everything at the time, and he kind of surprise wins, and he talking about election night and the things coming, returns coming in and what they need to go their way so that they win. So it's a very interesting book. I didn't do a tie like Nancy. I don't like ties. A runner up. And that's A Lynching at Port Jervis. Philip Dre is a really notable historian of American lynching. Wrote the book At the Hands of Persons Unknown. So when I saw he was writing this book about Port Jervis, other than the fact that it was interesting to even think that there would be a lynching around here, it was interesting that this historian thought it was significant enough to devote a book to it. So if you're interested in the topic, I think this is a very enlightening book. And I just added this afternoon. This is a book that I've talked about before, but when I was looking at all of the different genres and areas, we had recommendations, and it occurred to me that we didn't have much in terms of a sports book. So if you're looking for a sports book for someone who likes basketball, likes the Knicks, this is a great story. And again, if I think Nancy mentioned this earlier, in terms of a book where true life is stranger than fiction, that's certainly the case with the 1990s Knicks. And favorite book from 2021 that I finally got around to read. So you saw Nancy's list, books from the year that she didn't get a chance to read, things she wanted to read. This is one which I actually have not quite finished. I'm in the middle of, but I was just telling Nancy today, it took a turn in the middle, where it's handling issues that we dealt with in terms of COVID and George Floyd. It takes place in Minneapolis. So I almost got the sense, I haven't gotten to the point where I wanted to do a little research on the author. I want to kind of read it and then do that. I almost got the sense that she was writing this book and then all these things happened and she felt like she couldn't ignore it. And she incorporated it right into the book. And I think it actually works. Um, a really good book. She's a Native American author, so most of her books, it's one of those things where Nancy's been recommending her books. I always like in a year when I look back to try to say, well, I finally read a book by this author or that author. I said last year, I think it was Jonathan Franzen. I finally read a book by Jonathan Franzen. So this is the one where I'm saying, well, I'm finally reading Louise Erdrich, and I'm really enjoying it. And if you would be interested in it, we're having a chapters book discussion on Zoom on Valentine's Day, February 14th, and we'll talk more about it there. And then here are my books. Nancy mentioned ahead of time, she said, well, maybe in March we should do something about Irish books. So maybe we will, and if we do, I'll have to read We Don't Know Ourselves by Fintan O'Toole before that. The Revolutionary Samuel Adams, I actually am reading that now as well. Usually I'm reading a couple different books at a time, at least a fiction and a nonfiction, depending on my mood. But I don't know if I'll finish. I might end up finishing, but I haven't finished it yet, so I didn't include it. Half American by Matthew Delmont, that's got good reviews. It's been on some lists at the end of the year. And I've never read Barbara Kingsolver. So I've seen Demon Copperhead is supposed to be kind of a Appalachian setting, which I always love Appalachian fiction. Being from Pittsburgh, the Paris of Appalachia. And so maybe this Demon Copperhead is my opportunity to say I've finally read a Barbara Kingsolver book.
Yeah.
So some upcoming webinars that you might be interested in. January 6th at 4 p.m., we're going to talk about our most anticipated books of 2023. Yeah, hard to believe it's going to be 2023. I know, Mary Beth Keane has one, so I had to mention it now. I can't even. I can hardly wait to read that book. And then in February, Karen Ostertag, who buys the romance for the library, is going to be talking about romance reads. And a little off topic, but December 16th, we're going to be doing cookie recipes. Not necessarily, some of them are from cookbooks, some of them are from family, some of them are from the internet, and some of them have just been passed down from old staff members at the library. So please join us if you're interested on the 16th.